Kena Bridge of Spirits is one of the most charming games I've ever played. First up, visually the game is absolutely gorgeous and really unique looking, mainly because of its part painting, part Pixar-like art style, which is just so distinct. The volumetrics and depth of field are fine-tuned, the environments are densely packed with vegetation, every corner is packed with detail. There's a good amount of variety in the locations as well, with darker environments like caves, up-high towers, rainy forests, and so on. The colors are vibrant when they have to be, and then wash out in enemy-infested areas to set the right tone in the right situation. Effects and particles are abundant during combat but look really clean so they aren't distracting. Textures are well defined but never lose the Pixar-like aesthetic. The locations and vistas in the game look absolutely stunning. But none of these things are as good as the animations in Kena. Just look at this shit, bro.
My father was a spirit guide. Our traditions are different, but he helped many spirits pass from this life to the next.
Now granted, this is a pre-rendered cutscene, but the animations in game are also fantastic. Whether it be movement, combat, or facial animations during interactions, the expertise of the animation department clearly shows. They are so consistently good at any given time. Of course, there's a photo mode available here as well. The game is also surprisingly polished on the bug side, like this was the only bug I encountered during my entire playthrough. What the f is going on here? Now this is a superpower I didn't know about. What isn't polished or consistent is the performance of the game. Do keep in mind that I played this game in its launch week with just the day one patch, so I hope some of these issues I'm about to mention have probably already been fixed. But for now, let's talk about them. There's weird frame drops and stuttering for no reason, regardless of the setting levels or system specifications. Like, come on, you can see the stutters even in just the intro of SkillUps' video on this game. And this is why you should subscribe to me, because none of those f***ers with pre-release copies are gonna go raw and no rubber on a game like I do. God, that was one of my best plugins ever. It's like the game will be running fine during a fight where there's tons of enemies, movement effects, particles, and shit flying all over the place, but drops frames right after the fight ends or when you're just f***ing around in the open and even closed areas where there's nothing happening that justifies the shitty performance. Like some older games, Kena Bridge of Spirits stops for a second when it's auto-saving, even on the latest NVMe SSDs. Sometimes the textures take a bit to load and that stutters the game as well. That's when I decided to switch from DX12 to DX11, and I wish I would have done this sooner. Don't get me wrong, the game still had stutters, but their quantity was reduced a lot, like brain cells in people after becoming a Twitter user. But yeah, the takeaway here is check online if these problems have been fixed before you start playing. Now, unlike the performance, you don't have to worry about the sound in the game. The sound effects are great all throughout, whether it's jumping, hitting, or just sliding. The sound effects are crispy as hell, boy. What's better is the environmental sounds. The forest or just any other place in this game sounds spectacular. The sounds of the woods mixed with the breeze and other parts of the environment help a lot in immersing you into the game during exploration. The voice acting is also great, and I'll talk about it more in the story part of this video. But what really stole the show in my opinion is the music. Whether it be the general positive music during exploration, the ambience, the combat music, or the orchestral beauties during important moments in the story, the music fits so perfectly where it's placed, and it's just incredible, bro. The soundtrack hits harder than Chris Brown hits Vim. The story is about the main character Kena, who is a spirit guide. This mantle was passed on to her by her father, and her job is to basically guide souls to the spirit world by gathering artifacts that belong to the souls in question. The game starts with her coming to this new place which was struck by tragedy, and pretty much everyone who lived there got killstreaked. There she finds these creatures called Rot that possess mystical powers and help her in their conquest. Really wish this was actually one of their superpowers though. Then you are introduced to the main villain of the game, who tells you death and corruption are all that remain here. From there on, the story is about Kena trying to help these spirits find peace and to get to the bottom of the corruption plaguing this land. Now, I'm gonna be honest here, the base plot didn't stick to me at first, and I still don't think it's too memorable on its own. What makes it memorable, in my opinion, is the characters and the writing. To free a major spirit, you have to collect 3 artifacts that belong to them. During this, you get to spend a good amount of time with the characters, and also get to see events that transpired in the past and transform the locations. All the characters you meet throughout the story have astonishing voice acting. There's no instance of bad line delivery anywhere here. What's truly special here is the charm this game has. I had a smile on my face most of the times the characters interacted with each other. Really heartwarming shit here, man. But that doesn't mean it's a watered down story that's afraid to be mature. I mean, we're not talking about the MCU Spider-Man movies, are we? There are moments where this game's writing is a spectacle to behold. Lessons about loss, forgiveness, and moving on while still holding on to what you had with the ones you lost is at the core of this story. Kena Bridge of Spirits is at its peak when you finally free a very troubled spirit after learning all the shit they've been through in powerful, heartwarming, bittersweet scenes where the second to none animation, voice acting, and writing come together magnificently with absolutely spectacular music orchestrating the moment. It hits you so hard in the feels during these moments, it's beautiful. Coming to the gameplay now, Kena Bridge of Spirits is a hub-type open-world game and it maintains a nice emphasis on exploration. There are areas that are blocked at first but open up as you progress through the story. There's two types of currencies, one for upgrades and one for customizing your adorable rot army with cool hats. You can find these in chests, light lamps, or fixing up artifacts or moving them to the right location, and of course by defeating enemies. By exploring, you also find more rot to grow your army and level up. I'll expand upon the leveling system in a bit. There's also cursed chests which have challenges associated with them. For example, defeat a certain number of enemies or defeat enemies within the given time limit and stuff like that. I was actually surprised by just how fun some of these actually were. Some of the blocked areas act as optional missions in the form of spirit mail. You can find spirit mail during your playthrough and bring it to the said locations to free more spirits. Sometimes these lead to full-fledged fights with tons of enemies and even boss fights. There's quite a bit of platforming here and the game takes you to very high altitude sometimes like it's ecstasy or some shit. The climbing felt a little weird to me at first because in the back of my head I was expecting it to be like Uncharted where you have to jump only when you have to close larger gaps, but I got used to it really quickly. There's also zip points where you can shoot your bow and yeet yourself to them. You'll also be doing a lot of environmental puzzle solving in the game, whether it be to reach an out of reach place with the help of your rot army or stuff like figuring out how to open a door by looking for clues in your surroundings. The game always kept me engaged. Another prevalent puzzle mechanic is called the Forest Tears, which allows you to combine your rot and turn them into a demon-like creature that can clear corruption and open up paths. There's meditation points in the game that increase your maximum health like the hot springs in Ghost of Tsushima, but they feel way more useful here as they actually provide a decent increase to your maximum health. The exploration gets better as you progress as more mechanics like bombs which can trigger magical environmental objects are introduced alongside more of what was already there. The puzzles become better as now there's more stuff to work with. Later on in the game you'll be zipping and moving all over the place in some fights, which brings me to the combat. You have your staff at close range to perform light and heavy attacks. Very soon you also get a bow as your ranged weapon. When you defeat enemies they drop courage drops which fills up the courage meter that allows you to use the rod during combat. The rod can distract enemies or can be used to perform special attacks with your weapons. You can avoid attacks by either dodging or blocking with an energy shield. Just like many games, if you time the block right, you can also parry attacks. When you have defeated the enemies in a particular area, you can clear it of corruption by using the rod. It was really satisfying seeing an area go from dark and gloomy to vibrant after I had beaten the shit out of enemies. The animations, effects, and controller make the combat feel impactful, while stuff like the fact that you can get hit in the middle of your dodge if you don't time it right, or the fact that you cannot cancel an attack in between to parry makes you focus on your timing more. The enemy variety is also very good and used very smartly so that you have to switch your tactics in fights. The combat is simplistic but responsive, fun, satisfying, and also challenging on the harder difficulties. But just like the exploration, the combat gets way better as you progress, even more so than the exploration. The upgrade system here is kinda perfect in my opinion. There's an upgrade section on the tree for every weapon like the staff, bow, and bombs I told you about. A few upgrades are already unlocked from the start, but to unlock more you have to level up. And as I previously mentioned, to level up you have to collect a certain number of rot. Every single upgrade that is present here feels important, and I found myself constantly using pretty much all of them. There's general stuff like increased arrow capacity, and then there's badass crazy shit like energizing an arrow with rot so f***ing hard it practically rips through enemies. As I said in my Far Cry 3 video, I really like when upgrade systems don't ask for insane amounts of currency and don't fill themselves up with mundane bullshit abilities. The sense of progression here is incredibly strong and the game becomes more fun the more you play it. Oh, and remember when I told you about the rot grouping up to form this creature? Well, there's also times when you get to use them in combat to absolutely delete enemies. My personal favorite part of the entire gameplay experience is the boss fights. All the boss fights in the game are just awesome. They require you to learn the movesets of the bosses and are usually gonna take more than 1 or 2 tries to reach the climax like your girl when she has sex with you. These fights feel challenging but fair, until you're fighting in a very high place and can't stop yourself from falling to death even with the zipping ability. But the real challenge comes in the form of these big boy bosses. These guys are formed when you finally gather all 3 artifacts to free a major spirit. And believe me when I say, you'll get absolutely wrecked during your first few tries. They're so damn cool and badass in terms of their design and movesets. These fights also feel challenging but fair, until the boss pulls some other one-hit kill bullshit like this, which is practically impossible to parry. Defeating and finally overcoming these challenging fights is never not satisfying. Other than these big boy bosses, most of the bosses you defeat will show up as additional enemies with other new enemy types during normal combat, expanding the enemy variety even more alongside making these combat encounters more challenging and even more fun, which is just another reason as to why the game gets better as you progress. The stuff you learn during these boss fights doesn't just become irrelevant after the fights are over. The only major problem I have with the combat is that there's no indication indicator for when an enemy is attacking you from behind. They should have had something like God of War 4, because there were times where there were a lot of enemies to fight at once and I died from an attack which I couldn't even see on the screen. In boss fights, the target lock resolves this to some extent because you're fighting one enemy, but a boss like this annoying who uses bees with ranged attacks to do his dirty work and warps from place to place pretty much eliminates the purpose of the lock-on system. Now, before we move on to the conclusion of this video, I want to talk about the stupidest criticism these professional game reviewers are giving this game, and that is, it's not doing anything different. I think most people would agree with me when I say that not every game needs to reinvent the wheel. In most cases, it just needs to provide a fun, functional, quality product, which is a very enjoyable experience. Now, although Kena put some of its own twists on them, yes, it does have systems borrowed or inspired by other games. But to an extent, every game does. And what bothers me the most is the fact that these guys give every Call of Duty game and every single new trash Assassin's Creed game 9s every year, and then have the nerve to call out this standalone game instead of telling about actual flaws of the game. Get the out of here. So as you can probably tell by now, I enjoyed my time with Kena Bridge of Spirits a lot, despite its week 1 performance issues and a few other shortcomings that I mentioned. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel, and also hitting the bell notification icon so that you may never miss out on any future content. Some of my other videos are on your screen right now, along with my latest track, Flip the Script, which is available for streaming on all platforms. Do consider checking them out as well, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching, my dudes.